Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Nolan Theisen, and I'm with the Energy Security and Sustainability Program at GLOBSEC Policy Institute. And together with Buildings for the Future, I'm very happy to convene this virtual roundtable on Slovakia's post-COVID-19 recovery, how to deliver a green boost to the economy. So while the focus obviously is on Slovakia's position and potential during this kind of post-crisis response and recovery period, we certainly do aim to consider this in the wider regional and EU context. And as you can see from our speakers, we'll be delivering these positions kind of from the outside, working in. So, of course, I also want to take advantage of our expert participants from Slovakia and the region. And of course, I wanted to ensure that there were some other non-Slovak speakers, not just myself, for the purpose of this discussion. So the format is as following. We'll have about 45 minutes for our panelists to make opening remarks. And the second half is meant to be more of an interactive dialogue. So everyone will then be afforded the rights and privileges of a panelist, with the ability to raise your hand and turn your audio off and on. So you can indicate in the chat, I believe you can raise your hand and I would call upon you, and you can unmute yourself to make any type of intervention, comment, or question. And as a moderator today, I expect probably you'll make my job easy, but otherwise, you know, of course, I can start with some follow-up questions. And lastly, so this is being recorded. This will be available on our website. We will also produce an outcome report, which will be distributed to key stakeholders, among them relevant ministries in Slovakia that were unable to participate. But excuse me, but certainly, you know, they are among our target audience, and this is really sort of just a kickoff discussion, and we do plan to incorporate a wider group of stakeholders going forward. Pardon me. So with that, I would like to introduce our amazing panelists that we have with us for the next 90 minutes. We have Mr. Martin Hojsik, member of European Parliament, Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety with Renew Europe. And I believe he might have to leave during the course of the conversation, so we'll start with him. Elena, Miss Elena Visnar-Malinovska cannot be with us today, unfortunately, but she has provided some input, and she is certainly, you know, part of this conversation and will be included in the outputs. We have Miss Livia Vasakova, Head of Economic Analysis Section, Representation of the European Commission in Slovakia. We have Mr. Norbert Kurila, newly appointed Advisor to the President, Office of the President of the Slovak Republic. And last but certainly not least, we have Katarina Nikodemova, who is the Director with Buildings for the Future. And she will have some visual aid as well with her presentation. So I believe I would like to, as I mentioned, kind of start from the outside and work our way in. So without further ado, I can give the floor to Mr. Hojsik. And, you know, you've seen the description of the event. So basically, I'm just asking all of you to kind of, you know, reflect, maybe update us on the latest from where you sit, and of course, providing insight specifically to the opportunities perhaps in Slovakia, and of course within the context of the European Green Deal and other funding opportunities, maybe kind of help open us and tell us, you know, where this kind of conversation is happening in Brussels. Is a very important week, of course, with the recovery fund, the MFF. So there's a lot of things happening. And Mr. Hojsik, I give the floor to you, please.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'll start from what's going on in Brussels, and we'll try to not cover everything because I'm sure Livia has way more to it, also some of the insights from the Commission, and then move on to some of the developments in Slovakia, because we've been active also around here, and I think there are new developments related both to the European situation as well as the Slovak one. So this week is not only important because this week is important, but also the last week was very important in relation to kind of the post-corona recovery and the whole green transition. As you know, this week it's expected that on Wednesday, Ursula von der Leyen will be presenting the new proposal for the MFF, so the multi-annual financial framework, so the 7-year-old budget framework for the EU. But not only that, there is going to be a presentation also of the recovery package. So the planned package additional to the multi-annual financial framework, which should be about financing the recovery from the coronavirus. So not only the health recovery, but also, and very importantly, the economic recovery. And I think this is something which is important to bear in mind, because we have a difference in terms of the impact of the corona on the health of the population and on the economy. And I'm saying it specifically because what we see is Slovakia has been so far very lucky in having fairly little impact in terms of public health, yet the economical impact here is, I would say, above the average of the Union due to the structure of our economy. Now, importantly, also last week, what was happening is that the Executive Vice President Frans Timmermans, together with other commissioners, presented two very important strategies. One is the farm to fork, and the other one is the biodiversity strategy. Why they are important for the post-corona recovery is, the farm to fork is about agriculture to a large extent, and let's be honest, that is the largest pile of money from the EU budget goes to agriculture. And agriculture has a sizable impact, a really substantial impact on the environment and human health, and it also has a relevance for not only the employment in the agriculture itself, but the entire sector around it. Second, the biodiversity strategy is also very important because we're not only facing the climate emergency, we're also facing the biodiversity emergency, because this is something where we are facing rapid decline in biodiversity and the loss of species, which I'm sometimes jokingly saying that if we are really silly, then the loss of biodiversity will end the civilization before the climate change does. So hopefully we'll manage to avoid both, but that's why we need really ambitious recovery package, ambitious MFF, but above all, they need to be not only spending certain percentage on the climate and environment, they need to be coherent with our objectives, which means they should spend zero money in harming environment, harming the climate. Now, that's where the European Parliament came up with its position on the recovery package and the MFF on the last plenary, calling for alignment with not only the Green Deal, but our, let's be honest, commitments in Paris and other treaties, which we should be following. And we will want to be having an influence on how the final package looks like. And it's one of the reasons why I'm running away to the budget committee hearings, where I'm a substitute member, because I'm a rapporteur for the EIB. And therefore, I want to be discussing on how this is going to be aligned. Now, coming back to Slovakia, where it reflects is, first of all, I've been calling for the green recovery and kind of the commitment to green recovery from the side of the Slovak government since the very start. And I was happy to hear from the Minister of Environment saying, yes, I'm signing the Danish Ministerial Declaration and officially adhering to it. This was the good step. The bad step was that despite this, when the government has agreed to kind of and task the Minister of Finance with preparing the batch of different projects for the post-corona recovery, there was not a single mention of environment, not a single mention of climate, not a single mention of the commitment made by the environment minister, which I find really sad. And I think this is something which hopefully will not be the case in the final package. And it's not only about having some, what I heard the Minister of Economy is likely to take on board some of the proposals around energy efficiency, but that actually there is going to be a policy coherence, that we will not see the situation that we do some good things, at the same time we do some bad things. This is something which is a traditional problem in Slovakia, but not only here. Now, the further set issues that we face is, on one hand, you have policy incoherence where the environmental strategy agreed by the previous government is calling for more recycling, yet the current Slovak government, in my view, in contradiction to the strategy and other, for example, waste prevention strategies, is supporting and is taking the position of supporting the use of just transition funding for building up of waste incinerators, pretendedly called waste to energy plants, which is not in the Commission proposal. So there is a push for amendment. And just yesterday, the Slovak government called for the use of the recovery package and kind of further funding for a gas infrastructure project, which is disguised as a transition technology. Yet there is not only the high risk of a stranded assets, which is being confirmed by a number of studies, nor is there a need for additional infrastructure for what is called renewable gas or clean gas or hydrogen, because that's something which the current capacities of the infrastructure, according to the numerous studies, are fully sufficient. So what I'm concerned about is substantial policy incoherence on the side of the government. And to tell you a concrete example also, this government is calling for public money, European money into gas infrastructure, yet the main governmental party committed ahead of the elections to phase out the use of gas for electricity and energy by 2030. So it doesn't really make much sense. Very last thing, I'm happy that there is a number of proposals also from the civil society in terms of the concrete measures within the recovery package. Me and my team presented concrete proposals last week, and we were looking into those where the possibilities that they are almost ready, that they are basically readily deployable, they are costed, and we have a concrete data and concrete numbers of how much money can go there, how much output would there be in terms of the jobs. It ranges from the building renovations to renewable energies to wastewater treatment plant, climate adaptation measures for the water capture, especially in the urban areas, but also support for the circular economy, which I think is really, really important. These were also communicated before in the earlier version to the Commission, to the team of Franz Timmermans, and they were very happy about them because we're also looking for concrete examples from on the ground in the Central Europe. So I'm looking forward to hear more from the Commission, but I'm also looking forward to hear more from the Slovak government as regards the concrete steps for the post-corona recovery, because it's a sad occasion, but also a huge opportunity which we cannot miss, and it would be really pity to miss it.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great way to open. And exactly, even at the national level, it's still, I think, everyone is maybe kind of working on the fly and, getting the recovery measures together. So that's certainly something that, we would like to be involved with as this process kind of continues. And with that, yes, I can turn to Livia, please, and perhaps you can help fill us in a bit more on European Commission's activities and particularly how you see them translating to Slovakia, and maybe your opinions about how Slovakian government can move forward and take advantage of some of these opportunities.
Good morning, everybody, and first of all, many thanks for the invitation and for organizing such an event to both co-organizers, GLOBSEC and Buildings for Future. I expected that Elena will somehow join, because yesterday we divided the task that she will speak more about the Commission initiatives and I will speak more about the implications for Slovakia, but I will try to cover also for her. And Martin already presented, I would say, the most important proposals that were either adopted or are in the pipeline for this week. So biodiversity and farm-to-fork strategy with very ambitious target for the next decade, but also for longer, were presented last week. And these were the two proposals complementing the European Green Deal proposals that were proposed still this year. And some others will follow by the end of this year. There should be a proposal also on the definition of biomass, on the sustainability of biomass, and this is something very important also in the Slovak context. Then what's coming today, and Martin already very well presented it, that we have the biggest package of measures, and it is about money. So it's the 7 years budget, a revised proposal taking into account the effects of Corona and the recovery and resilience instrument. Europe is facing the biggest downturn since the World War II, or even since the Great Depression. So really, we need to do something to revive the economy, and digital and green agenda should be the backbones of the revival. The proposals are coming out tomorrow at the European Parliament presentation. Our President Ursula von der Leyen will basically resume what was discussed in the College of Commissioners and present also the figures and all the proposals. So I think that's more or less for the big stuff. We also had the modernization and innovation workshop that was done in cooperation with colleagues from DG CLIMA, and these are additional sources of financing, not coming from the EU budget, but coming from the emission trading scheme, and this also provides various opportunities for Slovakia. Slovakia is also among 10 member states that can benefit from modernization fund. These are, I would say, quick fixes for the energy system, while innovation fund is more for, I would say, mature innovation and research projects. But it's also open for Slovak companies, and hopefully we will not be a net payer as we are for the Horizon 2020, and we might be for Horizon Europe if things don't change. Also, there were country-specific recommendations for Slovakia, which are resuming the main areas where Slovakia should take action. And this year, there is one part focusing on front-loading investment into digital and green economy. So I think that this is now completing the picture that really the green economy is at the forefront of the attention coming from the EU. Now, coming back to Slovakia, and I would like to reflect on my experience of a European Commission official posted for 7 years here in Bratislava, and based on various debates that I had with stakeholders, that there might be some divergences between a long-term, fully decarbonized vision that was well presented by Martin, and maybe some real perspectives for the next 1 to 5 years for Slovakia and the whole region. And I have 3 issues I would like to focus on, and all 3 of them are mainly linked to decarbonization of heating. The first one is the use of gas as transitional fuel, and it was partly addressed by Martin. I would like to speak about the gas boiler scheme that was presented by the Ministry of Environment and strongly supported also by the Commission representation here in Bratislava. This scheme should replace solid and waste individual heating. The subsidies should go for the poorest and most polluting households, solving the air quality problem. This represents around something like 80% of PM 10 and PM 2.5, and these are due to local heating. The current proposal for the financial regulation does not allow fossil fuels to be subsidized, but there is a small opening that 1% of the overall allocation can be used for gas. Poland is the main proponent of this. For Slovakia, I think it can be a useful initiative for transition period. Slovakia is the second most gasified country in the EU, and it can definitely help us with the air quality problem. I think that also that Norbert was working or was involved a lot in the proposal, and can maybe comment on this later on. The second issue is biomass. As I just mentioned, the Commission will produce something on sustainability of biomass still this year, but probably towards the end of the year. And there are various issues in Slovakia linked to the sustainability of biomass, in particular woody biomass, but also to the mass cultivation of some crops in Slovakia. On the other hand, there is a requirement of the Renewables Energy Directive that Slovakia, as well as other countries, should reach a target of 1.3 percentage point increase in the RES share in heating every year. And biomass seems to be the most common option so far. It also represents something like 60% or even more of all renewables, not just in heating, but overall. But is biomass a real alternative for heating when taking into account all the sustainability issues, and what are the conditions until which we can still use biomass, and how these conditions should be implemented and informed in Slovakia would be a very crucial issue. The firm point, and this was also addressed by Martin, is waste. The Commission and most environmental activists speak about the waste hierarchy, where on top you have the prevention of waste, then you have recycling, and most of them stop there. However, we have very strong targets regarding landfilling. Slovakia was lagging behind, and I don't know whether we can really jump from landfilling to prevention or for recycling. Also, when you look at the map of Europe, you see that in Western Europe, you have a lot of incinerators or waste to energy plants. In Germany, I think there are around 160. In Slovakia, we have just 2. Also, a very topical example for Slovakia, it was already mentioned by Martin, is the transformation of the Upper Nitra region, where a solution for heat supply probably needs to be found by this summer. Otherwise, there is a huge risk that production will continue from coal, which is definitely not what anybody from us wishes. And so far, the most technologically and innovative option that was considered is the one combining gas, biomass, and waste incineration. So here again, as it was rightly pointed out by Martin, the EU funds regulation does not allow funding after 2023. So it's still possible under the current financial period ending in 23, but it will not be possible from the new financing period. So I would say that these are definitely the issue that will pose challenges for Slovakia, while on one side trying to really encompass the highest ambitions in green technologies, in renewables, but on the other hand, taking into account also the affordability of energy, affordability of investment, in particular in times of Corona. And maybe in some countries, like neighboring Austria, the choice is more straightforward. Their gas will be banned as of 2025 in new installations. In Slovakia, the situation might be slightly different. And we need to think also about this affordability and the value of money, use of resources. I have not spoken about energy efficiency or a better regulatory support regime for renewables, because these are straightforward options where I think everybody will agree that these are must-dos for Slovakia, and I hope really that there will be an agreement among various players to go ahead with these ones. I think that Katarina from Buildings for Future will develop a bit more on this renovation wave that is coming from the EU, and I think that this is something very crucial for Slovakia. But I wanted also to mention these points where there might be divergences, and we will need to focus very quickly on these elements. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you for that, Livia. And with that, I would turn to Mr. Korila, and of course, you do have experience in your very recent past life with some of these issues that Livia and Martin have outlined. So it'd be great to just have your input, you know, from that experience. Also, of course, your new position, maybe speaking on behalf of the President's Office. So I leave the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Nolan, and good morning to all of you. Happy to join this virtual roundtable. As you said, now I'm wearing a different hat, but still covering the same important issues. So happy to stay connected. So first of all, many thanks also for the initial presentations and views provided by co-speakers. In my personal capacity, I would like to maybe frame it more towards what could be happening on the ground, here in Slovakia. And as you know, Minister of Economy is now preparing a set of measures, around 30 concrete measures, how to basically walk out from the coronavirus. And as Martin from the European Parliament was hinting, I sincerely, at this stage, I really miss very concrete greening elements in these proposals that would basically reflect on climate crisis and sustainability in more broadly speaking. But I think what is even more important are the concrete investments, public investments that basically support or are pro-growing in their nature, because we can still unlock ourselves in wrong decisions or investment decisions, or we could be investing in jobs that are perhaps jobs of the past, not jobs of the future, and this could be tackled at the same time, basically supporting the economy and at the same time tackling the sustainability or climate. So I would basically come up with very concrete ideas that are basically coming from my mind, and it is definitely energy sector per se, because now and it is also my observation that we miss basically a complete or more concrete picture towards, let's say, energy networks and distributional systems. There is not so much talk about the smart grids and how we can upgrade our energy network system that basically would be fit for future. As we know that the energy will be over time more decentralized, and we don't really see much happening on the ground, even though it is a role for the state to come in to help upgrading networks to be basically better fit for the future. So this is one of the type of concrete public investments that would help. Livia also mentioned energy efficiency. This goes both for installation for the companies, but also for the energy sector, but also for the housing sector. And this is one of my second idea, that we would need to accelerate the retrofitting of the old building stock, be it on the public side, where the age of the aging issue, it basically matters. And now we are at a stage where all these investments that would remain with us for next 20, 30, 40 years are basically decided upon. So let's be smarter. Let's perhaps invest more money, not only for simplistic isolation, but make it basically more complete picture, having in mind basically improving the performance, the energy audits, and having all measures tackled at once. So also changing and improving the roofs, boilers, windows, and not only doing the one part of it, and also investing in new materials, also relying perhaps on the reused materials. As you know, lots of buildings will be demolished, and there will be lots of, let's say, construction waste that could be easily recycled and put back into the system, provided that there are no environmental or climate risks. And of course, on top of the speeding up or accelerating the retrofitting of the houses, I would also help with other basically low-hanging fruits measures that are not costing any money, for example, the more speedy amortization of the investments. It would be very smart to allow much faster and quicker amortization of those investments. They cannot or they don't have to be necessarily put place over 20-25 years, but could be basically time frame could be shortened very much. So this is for the second sector. Third sector is mobility sector, where also public investments matters a lot, and this goes around the same with energy and distributional networks for the electrification. It is up to the cities, regions, and states to get aligned and to provide a decent funding, basically also using perhaps the revenues from the auctioning of CO2s. So again, there is no direct impact on current public finances, but rather relying on new incomes or revenues that could be recycled. As you know, just one example, in environmental fund is the instrument or the tool that could be utilized in support of transitioning towards more competitive climate and let's say resource efficient economy. There are around 700 million euros parked, frozen assets now at the moment, and they could be very easily eased in supporting more environmental and climate projects. On top of electrification, I would also be seeking more proposals towards promoting, let's say, city transport, more integrated transport, having more investments into cycling routes, in strengthening, let's say, the low carbon mobility, buying new buses, especially for the bigger cities, more, let's say, electric or hydrogen or gas run. So I think there's a lot to be done, and provided that public investments are flowing into the right directions. And some of them are basically not costing any money, only providing incentives for going that way. And maybe last but not least, and then I will be happy to elaborate a little bit more on that, is the less focus on technological emissions and rather and provide some attention to natural sinks and capturing CO2 from using the land and forests. This is something that is very neglected, and provided that green measures could have a faster uptake, for example, in land use or in the forestry management, that would provide a much targeted possibility for capturing of CO2s, for example, in changing the patterns, how to manage the forests, or providing more green measures, in also including water retention measures, where you create a better local climate that is more resilient and is basically more ready to capture more CO2. So I think those investments are at our hands, and it's up to the government how to frame it and how to make it operational very soon. So I think I will stop here.
Thank you so much, Norbert. I really like the way this conversation is flowing, kind of going from sort of big picture down to more kind of concrete applications. And of course, with that, I'd like to turn the floor to Ms. Nikodemova. And I believe you can share your presentation with us.
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I will try to share the screen. Can you see it now?
Not at the moment.
No?
Not yet.
Maybe I'm supposed to do that. Give me 1 minute and I will see.
Maybe now.
Oh,
let's see.
Yes, wonderful.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, apologies also for not joining with the video, but it is due to technical issues. I'm afraid my connection would collapse. But still I have the presentation, so that will help me to guide you through the information that I would like to present. And I will basically build on all the smart ideas that were already said and presented, but with more focus on the building sector. And I will try to explain very briefly why the building sector and investment in the buildings should be one of the investments and should be considered as one of the investment that could help us to boost the economy in a green way. First of all, some very basic facts. We all know that we need the buildings, and the buildings are everywhere around us. Maybe an interesting fact that we also present quite often also to the stakeholders in order to stress the importance of the buildings is that we are indeed an indoor generation. And we spend a lot of time indoor. It is, according to different international studies, it is over 90% of the time we spend indoor. So basically the quality of the indoor environment is very important and is affecting a lot our health and our productivity. Apart from that, the building stock in the EU is also a big producer of the CO2 emissions. In the EU, it's 36%. And it is also a sector that consumes a lot of energy. So basically, with the proper building renovation and investment into buildings, we take it as an important instrument that can help us not only to increase the quality of life of the people and the users of the buildings, but it is also an instrument that can help us to reach the climate and energy goals. And that is valid both at the EU and the national levels. So basically, the investment into renovation of either it is single-family houses or the public buildings should be considered as one of the ways how we can deliver on a green boost of the economy. And I will cover both the family houses and the public buildings. What we know about the single family houses in Slovakia is that there is about 1 million of them. And we also know that more than half of them were built before 1980. So basically they are not suitable or they are running out of time, and they are getting older and older and not that adjusted to new conditions and climate conditions. We also know that not even half of them were renovated. So basically about half of them is still waiting for the renovation. But also we have to say that the renovation rate compared also to other European countries is quite relatively okay. It is between 2 and 2.5% annually. It's not ideal, but it's not even like very, very bad. But still there is potential to work on the renovation of the houses. What we also know is that regarding financing, those renovations that were done were mostly financed from private sources of the owners or in combination with the loans from the commercial banks. So there is also a big potential for the state to create programs that would help people to finance their renovations better. Regarding the public buildings, here the potential is even bigger. We know that there are about 15,000 public buildings, and here the renovation rate is much slower. We assume it is only about 1% a year. So we we see a big potential here that the renovation rate should really speed up, and 75% of the public buildings were not renovated. Why should we renovate them, and what then would be the benefits? Well, we know that the energy costs for running the public buildings are over 300 million euro a year. And we also know that if we really invest into proper renovation of the public buildings, we can save between 4 and 6 million euros a year only on the energy costs. So it is really one of the measures that in the economic terms make a lot of sense, because it would really lower the energy costs. With lowering the energy demand, we are also contributing to the climate goals, because the production of CO2 emissions would lower automatically as well. But talking only about the energy consumption is not the only argument that we should mention here, because we also should communicate a little bit more about the indoor environment, the quality of the indoor environment, because basically with well renovated houses, we are also making the buildings more healthy and leading to better productivity of the people that are using the buildings. And I will sum up with 5 main reasons why the renovation wave should be one of the elements of the post-COVID recovery economic plans in Slovakia. We are also communicating those arguments to the stakeholders and relevant ministries. So the first argument is the economic argument, or the economic reasons, because the construction and the renovation of the buildings make up the main share of the construction production. It is about 60%. So if we want to help the economy in Slovakia, it is one of the sectors that really makes sense to invest in. We are also saying that by supporting buildings, we are also supporting domestic demand, domestic labor and employment, and the local economy. Because the buildings are here and they need the renovation here. This goes also hand in hand with the support for the citizens and the municipalities, because those are the users of the buildings, and by providing a better quality buildings, we are really helping them to live a better life. Also, the investment has a very big potential, and the projects are basically just ready to be implemented. As I already mentioned at the beginning, we know that 3/4 of the public buildings were not renovated yet, and about half of the residential buildings were not renovated yet. So there is a potential for investment. We also know that the municipalities have prepared projects that were not supported. They are ready, and they just need this green light and money for implementation. And also, according to a last survey that we did among the owners of the family houses, we know that about 40% of them were planning to carry out some renovation in the upcoming next 2 years. So there is a will and there is a potential to work on this sector. So it just needs a little bit more support. And last but not least, we also always should keep in mind that by investing into buildings, we are also investing into health and the environment, because of all the reasons I mentioned before, of the CO2 emissions and the quality of the indoor environment. So I guess I will leave it here, but I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Katarina, really, grounding us with some facts and circumstances in Slovakia. So I think we're doing very well on time. And the intention now, of course, is to turn this discussion over to our expert participants. And I'm hoping that this can be kind of interactive. So as I understand now, Lucia, if you could perhaps enable our participants to join the conversation. And in the meantime, maybe I can sort of open the discussion. And first of all, I welcome the panelists to respond to fellow interventions. And of course, we do have Mr. Hedyi now on behalf of Mr. Hojsik. So you can direct your questions to him. And maybe I would just kind of open by, coming back to this inherent tension, you could say, between, long-term energy transition objectives of the European Union, of a country like Slovakia, versus, of course, the more immediate short-term necessities to emerge from economic crisis. And of course, that's why we hear about this renovation wave being shovel-ready products, so to speak. So everybody, can grab their shovels and be ready. But of course, we need to talk about how these projects are financed. What is the administrative burden for really, getting the shovels into the ground, so to speak. So maybe we could have some feedback. If anyone from the panel would like to maybe reflect on some of the comments made by co-speakers, would anyone like to jump in?
If I may, here is Livia. I
Yes.
would have a follow-up question to Norbert, because he mentioned that there is a lot of money in the environmental fund. According to my knowledge, it's a kind of general revenue to the budget. If he can maybe specify how much money can be directed to the green economy and how much money is really this general revenue for the budget. Thanks.
It seems that he left for some time, so maybe he is not back yet.
Yeah, actually, I'm just seeing that. So he said be back in 10 minutes, but maybe it hasn't been 10 minutes yet. So I can put that on hold when he does return, because I think that's a very good question. And again, I think it's very important to talk about the details in this case, and what is needed from the government to kind of enable these activities to kickstart as soon as possible. Would anybody else? Oh, and actually, speaking of which, Norbert, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, yeah, Livia actually just had a question for you, more specifically about the environmental fund. If you could maybe share a bit more about, what the criteria is for that, and how it might be more of a tool for kind of this green crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so basically, happy to elaborate a little bit. So we have an instrument already at our hands, so we don't need to be super innovative to create something and make it operational. What perhaps is what could be improved, how can we basically through environmental fund rechannel the funding towards, let's say, the private businesses and the business sector, because the environmental fund is predominantly used as a grant scheme towards municipalities, so basically cities and local authorities, not necessarily for business operations. So that's number one. And number two, it is super loaded with frozen assets, as I said. Only for the last year, the revenues generated from the auctioning amounted more than 200 million euros, out of which only up to, last year was something exceptional. So out of which perhaps almost 40% has been basically spent towards, let's say, sustainability and environmental projects. So, and number 3, it is not only a grant scheme, but also a fund that provides loans and basically credits, but again towards municipalities. So there are 3 dimensions of environmental funds, and it is the biggest public tool on environment, how to basically help local authorities and cities with necessary investments. So what I would basically frame that according to the current, let's say, status quo, there is some funding available for, let's say, retrofitting of houses, but the lump sum is contrary to or comparing to the needs, very negligible. Only up to 10 to 20 million are allocated for energy efficiency measures in public housing sector or building stock. Then what is now quite dominant, it is the program that actually in my previous life working for the ministry, we've been able to calibrate and generate. It is the fund to support wastewater treatment investments and drinking water investments. So this is also a typical pro-growing investments that helps regions to catch up with fast-growing regions, basically tackling the inequality and promoting new areas that could be used for tourism and other industries, if possible. And we have mobilized around 500 million euros for next decade, for up to 2030, to be basically used in these water infrastructure projects. And I see a great opportunity in unfrozen those assets and providing more leverage and more money towards, let's say, water infrastructure. It is a typical public investment, and of course we are lagging behind even our commitments from the EU accession process, where we committed ourselves to put in place wastewater framework in all cities and rural areas of more than 2,000 people equivalent or habitants equivalents, meaning that we still miss roughly 120 cities to make the sewage system basically operational. And then we have a big amount of local and very small areas, small villages below 1,000 inhabitants, where actually they were completely disconnected from any funding possibilities, and there was no source of funding for those kind of small communities. And it is exactly the fund or program that was addressed to these smaller authorities. And this program could be basically could grow, and more money that are already, as I said, parked there could be recycled back to the industry. So there is a very concrete mechanism and proposal that could be easily utilized. And those kind of investments are definitely fast growing or pro-growing, and could materialize definitely over time with more sustainability, having access to clean water and sanitation, especially for marginalized groups and low-income regions, where these problems are basically the problem. It is still the problem of today's, which is very alarming.
Great, thank you, Norbert. And yeah, I think that's a key point here. Of course, is looking within existing programs and trying to expand and apply some of these funds to get these projects working, whether it's water treatment or some of these public buildings that are ready to be approached. I saw a hand from Ms. Fischerova, if you would like to join in. And again, anyone else that would like to join, just please raise your hand and I can call on you. So, Gabriela.
Thank you, Nolan, and thank you all the panelists for very inspirational presentations and a lot of good ideas how to make the recovery green. All these ideas have one thing in common, and it's money. And I have to say that what Norbert has said about the assets, frozen asset in environmental fund, is not actually secret, unfortunately. And if it was, it's not anymore after today's presentation. So there is a lot of people who knows about this money, and they have a very, let's say, a lot of bright ideas how to use them. So we have to, as a ministry, we would have to fight to keep as much this money in our hands and to direct them there where they are most needed and where they are mostly efficiently used. What I want to say is that the amount of money is limited. So now the key issue is prioritization. And what how much benefit will money bring when put to certain type of investments in terms of either emissions reductions or improvement of life, like with water treatment and water supply grid and so on. So maybe panelists may elaborate a bit, especially I don't know whether Mr. Hojsik is there. I suspect that he has to leave already. So what is if they have some analysis or whether they give some thinking to the question where the money where from the money will come and how to deal with this fight or with this different interest of different sector of governments different sectors of government when it comes to spend the money either from environmental fund or from other private other public sources towards the green investments. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. So Mr. Hedje, maybe you could respond to that, and then after that we can turn to Mr. Richard Miller. So Mr. Hedje, if you could go ahead, please.
I'm an advisor of Mr. Martin Hojsik, MEP, so I will try to answer your question about money. It's not clear yet, as far as I know. It's still a matter of discussion in the European Commission and European Parliament. It's a discussion mostly between the southern countries and countries from the north about loan or printing money or form of or amount of money. But what's clear is that there will be additional some of financial resources for energy recovery, and it's up to us how we will decide to spend this money. And I think it seems to me that our discussion is how can we spend this money in order to solve not only economic and social crisis, but also corona crisis, but also how we can use this money to solve climate and biodiversity and environmental crisis. So there are a lot of information. It will be a huge budget, and if I have a lot of a few minutes, I would like to react to Mr. Vasakova, if I can. Just a few points about gas and waste incinerators. No one is against gas boilers, of course, that's for sure. And we don't need to invest to new fossil gas infrastructure in order to support a few families with a few new gas boilers, that's for sure. The discussion is about totally different topic, and it is about it's a larger picture about energy trending in an energy sector. And we have three big problems with new fossil gas infrastructure. First is that economically viable reservoirs of coal, oil, and gas in fields where mining is already being mined, is working, are currently being built, contain enough carbon on their own to allow global warming to exceed safe limits of global warming, according to Paris Climate Agreement. So we cannot allow new fossil gas infrastructure because of carbon budget for Paris Agreement goals. Second is that development of new gas capacities also threaten the climate by committing us to fossil fuels into the future. Gas infrastructure is usually planned for many decades to come. If new gas pipelines and new infrastructure are built today, it will be very difficult to close them after 10, 15 or 20 years. So yes, of course, it can make sense for the next 5 or 10 years, but the gas infrastructure is not for next 5 or 10 years. And in case of closing down facilities before the end of their economic and technical lifespan, it would harm initial investments, and state can face legal and political barriers and problems. The third one is that gas, if we include to emissions, also leaks from transportation, the emissions from fossil gas is not so low as a gas industry often show us, as we can see from European Bank for Reconstruction and Development data from a recent study which included emissions 2% or 5% from links, and there were huge total emissions from gas sector, not far away from coal. So it doesn't make sense from this point. So we cannot be stuck with fossil fuel infrastructure and technologies for many decades ahead of us. And last sentence about gas. University of Manchester published a study several months ago where the result was that we have to close gas as an energy source till 2035 if we would like to meet the Paris Agreement goals. It's a very radical statement, even for me. And of course, Slovakia have different situation. That's for sure. We are more dependent on gas, so it's not a deadline for us, not realistic. But it is scientific information just for our thinking and consideration that, okay, we can discuss not so strict goal, but building infrastructure for the next 60 or 80 years is not in line with current carbon budget and Paris Agreement goals, if we are keep with the data and not only with phrases. And to the circular economy and waste incinerators. Mr. Vasakova mentioned that we cannot jump from landfills to recycling and waste hierarchy. The reality is totally opposite. If we will build new incinerators, we will stuck with old technology, and we will have a huge problem move towards to and achieve recycling goals. Why? There is several reasons. First is that proposed municipal waste incinerator, for example, in Upper Nitra region, as a potential alternative to coal for heating, will not be able to secure sufficient supply of municipal waste it's planned for 100,000 tons municipal waste per year. And this region have small towns and villages and produce much less municipal waste. So if it's this simple view that waste, Europe has a long history with waste incinerator and we can copy their history, ignore two facts. First, we don't have such big cities with such a huge generation of such a huge amount of municipal waste. And second, we are in a totally different situation according to better recycling technologies, higher recycling targets, more technologies for waste prevention, more experiences with waste prevention and reusing products and etc. So we can compare and copy the old 30, 40 years old way. Second is that if we, in spite of these facts, if we will try build a new incinerators for small towns in Slovakia, it will be pushing against the recycling developments. Slovakia or European Union set targets for recycling municipal waste till 2035 for 65%. And it's not the end of the story, because after in the next 2, 3, 4 years, the European Commission will discuss and probably prepare new targets for bio-waste, textile, and probably several other waste streams. So very probably the 65% recycling target will even increase. But even in this, in order to achieve this 65% recycling target, Slovak cities will not produce such a huge amount of mixed unsorted waste for waste to energy plants. And last but not least, we already have capacities for energy recovery, because we have two huge incinerators in Bratislava and Košice, which they have a capacity for currently for 12% of municipal waste in Slovakia, and we have cement kilns for co-incinerator, for co-incineration, and its capacity about 15%. So together, we already have capacity for 27% of energy recovery, and if you add the 65% of recycling target, so we have enough capacity, and we do not need another incinerator. And last problematic or two problematic points is climate greenhouse gases and toxic ash from incinerators. So municipal waste incinerators release fossil-based greenhouse gas emissions that are only slightly lower than those released by, for example, natural gas. And depending on the share of the fossil sources present in the waste, which can increase because of development of waste sorting and increase the non or hardly recyclable plastics, incinerators can even produce more greenhouse gases than natural gas. Thus, it is not clear what the climate benefits are in building installations with CO2 emissions comparable to those produced by natural gas, when experts and scientists say that natural gas also should be slowly replacing. And last point is toxic ash. Incinerators are not alternative to landfilling. The waste is not disappear. It's not a miracle, and we have to deal with toxic ash. Of course, modern installations are fine with emissions to air. It's okay, but Europe has huge problems with pollution and the pollution from toxic ash during the last years, and we still don't have enough legislation regulation for toxic ash from incinerators according to Stockholm agreement. So it's for longer discussion, but that's so I will close my points that no one is against the gas boilers for a few more families, and we have already infrastructure for us. It's a totally different discussion about the gas. And according to incinerator, it will create more problems than solutions. It will push against the recycling development, which is necessary according to EU legislation. It will produce not such a small amount of greenhouse gases. We will have a problem with toxic ash, and it's very expensive. We have to focus for circular economy better. And friends of the Slovakia have been preparing alternative for Upper Nitra without incineration for heating. And as far as I know, they will present this alternative for Upper Nitra without incineration and without gas in next few weeks, maximum months. So we can see and assume and consider this alternative. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ladislav. And I think one thing that the COVID-19 crisis has done, at least, unfortunately, is highlight the residential waste management challenges across Europe. And as I understand, Slovakia has one of the highest landfill rates. So this is certainly a unique challenge for Slovakia, but across the region as well. I'm not sure how much of that can kind of factor into this, green boost to the economy, but it's certainly one of the long-term issues. And of course, coming back to natural gas, I mean, clearly the governments in Central Eastern Europe have had plenty of time to prepare this position paper that was released yesterday, supporting EU funding for natural gas infrastructure. So this is probably an issue that's bigger than the topical framework of this conversation, but absolutely something to keep in mind, of course. And the counterpoints being that, gas infrastructure eventually can carry other forms of, renewable gas, hydrogen, biomethane. So I'd like to turn to a question from Marek Zembry, excuse me.
Nolan, can I please still react to what was
Yes, you may. And then we'll go to Marek after that.
On the gas infrastructure, I would like to leave the false impression that I was speaking about the gas infrastructure. Slovakia has interconnectors to all neighboring countries. So the thing that I was addressing was gas in heating, because Slovakia has a real problem how to replace coal in heating. And this, in my view, is linked to the gas boiler scheme that I was addressing. I was not at all speaking about the infrastructure, and it has no link to what Mr. Hegi was saying, and it has no link to the letter of several countries that Slovakia joined. So definitely this is not a Commission position. I was only addressing the issue of local heating, where I think it has a lot of sense in Slovakia. And it opens a bigger issue, what to do with decarbonization of heating in order to fulfill the objectives of the directive, but also to take into account the clean air objectives that we have as well, and to take into account the sustainability of biomass. And this is, I would say, one of the biggest challenges Slovakia is facing, what to do with the decarbonization of heating. There was also one point addressed by Mrs. Fischerova. So what to do with all the finances that we have? Just maybe to add to what she has mentioned, that there are really a lot of sources of financing that will be coming to finance green and sustainable projects. Connecting Europe facility might be financing infrastructure projects. It's already financing smart grid projects in distribution like Akon and Ingrid, done by Západoslovenská distribučná. Then cohesion policy is financing energy efficiency, it's financing, for instance, also this distance heating, is financing the water management scheme. So there's definitely a lot of money from this Just Transition Fund there is money for the transformation of whole region, not just for Horná Nitra, but also for Košice region, where there is a coal consuming power plant, and also a big steel producer that might be facing some stress in the future. Then I already mentioned modernization and innovation funds that are mostly used for businesses, but maybe also for transformation of the Upper Nitra region. And then Horizon Europe and Innovation Fund for more innovative projects. Now the question is how to basically link the most suitable financing to the projects. But what would be my advice definitely for Slovakia, to have as many projects prepared, because there will be a lot of money for this area. Also the allocation key of the cohesion money allocates a lot of money to cohesion policy. It was 40% in the previous draft. I'm not sure whether it's changed or not, but really we are speaking about enormous amounts of money, but projects needs to be ready. And that's what we are facing in the Upper Nitra region, that most of the projects that are on the list in the action plan that are not ready for financing, unfortunately.
Thank you, Livia, for the clarification and excellent points. So I think that's the key consideration is obviously not just funding, which is readily available, not only following the crisis, but before the crisis, but obviously preparing the projects. And coming back to Katarina, this is a question for you from Marek Zembry, and he was asking about the renovation rate of public buildings being less than 1%, and how might we scale this up to 3%, given the fact that there is 95% grant financing available. If you could maybe comment on that. And again, in the context of Livia's comments about what it will take to have these projects ready. What is the timeline for some of these renovation projects?
Yes, on the public buildings and the speeding up the renovation tempo of the public buildings, we see it as a big challenge because we also claim this publicly very often, that we should, or the state should, lead by example. So basically, we are really communicating to the stakeholders that the state should really work on the renovation, on speeding up the renovation rate, because how would the state then motivate the owners of the flats or the family houses to invest more into renovation when the state itself is not renovating properly? But here it is, I think, very much a matter of money, the public money, and the investment, EU structural and investment funds, because the renovation of the public buildings are mostly financed through the EU funds. And here we had, on this topic, we had a project last year in cooperation with We4 countries, and we made, I think it is 15 recommendations on how to use the EU money more effectively in order to invest better in the buildings and the energy efficiency of the buildings. And one of the recommendations is basically this, that the money that the EU funds are offering is too high, and it's really like not allowing other investors to invest into renovation of the public buildings. But there is more, as I said, I think it is 15 concrete recommendations on how to set up better the EU investment funds. So I can share the link because it's also in English. I can share the link now. I don't know where, but I will figure that out, and you can then have a look, closer look also at the other recommendations that are being set.
Great. We can make sure that gets out. So we are running low on time now, and I believe we had 2 hands raised. So if you could maybe kind of consolidate your question, comments. Can we start with Richard Miller? Who would like to hop on?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nolan, also for putting this roundtable together. a quick note on the funding, and then I'll frame a bit contribution according to the European Environment Agency State of the Environment report. So first on the financing, the answer is rather clear that majority of the funding that is in the environmental sector is coming from EU funds, and this will be in the future. Of course, there's an environmental fund, as it was mentioned by previous speakers. Maybe I would like to point out there is a very small funding scheme for municipalities, for villages, that they can use it for example, green infrastructure. Of course, this allocation is very small, but if it could be increased in the future, it could make a difference on the ground. And then the second point is about the European Environmental Agency State of the Environment report that was launched in December last year, and it highlights 3 sectors that really needs fundamental change in order to achieve sustainability in Europe. So these 3 sectors are energy, transport, and agriculture. And maybe I will repeat some of what previous speakers mentioned already, but in the energy, of course, the buildings, renewable, the complex energy efficiency projects, for example, the eco centers, and of course the continuation with gas boiler schemes or similar schemes to improve residential heating. And then in the transport, there's support to public transport and the biking. This is currently happening in frame of IROP program, and the last is agriculture. And here a lot of can be done with regards to support to green infrastructure in climate change adaptation and mitigation and the ecological connectivity. So these are three major areas that really needs fundamental change to put Europe in the sustainability path. What I was missing a bit is the education for new skills that are needed, and awareness raising for the new green agenda, Green New Deal, which is quite strong already, but this needs to be maybe improved to explain to people what it means. And then this support to the civil society. And lastly, that was mentioned already, is the political coherence with the Green New Deal and with the overall sustainability. So yeah, this is basically it. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thanks, Richard. And we had one more hand up. If very quickly, we could go to Liliana Rostocka. Maybe just have kind of boil things down to a minute or two, and then we can close up.
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. Liliana Rostocka speaking on behalf of Slovak Climate Initiative in Slovakia. I just have a short information for you from third sector in Slovakia on green recovery. So the thing is that all the climate NGOs in Slovakia are getting together with green recovery recommendations, putting aside their small differences to provide a really concrete improvements for the government. We already made a first package of 4 recommendations together and working on the second package. And the good news is they are mostly covering a lot of what has been said during this call as well. And also we are cooperating together on checking the yet missing policy coherency on green recovery and positions to European Green Deal. And also I would like to invite you for our discussion next Friday on green economic recovery, also with the Minister of Environment. and Martin Hojsik and the European Commission as well. So for Slovak speakers, you are very welcome to join the online discussion next week, and we will also provide some short English outcome afterwards. So this is basically from my side, just a short information, and thank you very much for organizing this webinar, because we can really see that each of this webinar discussion on green recovery is helpful and moving us forward as a community. Thank you.
Fantastic. Liliana, thank you so much. And we are right on time. It's 11:30. So I want to thank our distinguished panelists for joining us today, as well as all of you, our expert participants, just making this what I think is a really valuable discussion, contributing to other discussions that are ongoing. We'll provide an outcome report and distribute this back to you as well as other key stakeholders. And obviously there's still much to be done. And that's why we have these conversations, and we'll make sure that the messages are heard, and the idea is to move not only Slovakia forward, but to learn from other countries in the region and kind of interlink everything with European Union, with the funds, with the government programs. So again, just thank you so much for joining us, and until next time.